على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين معصومين صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We are now in the 10th of our lectures about Imam Husayn and completing the message of the Prophet. And this is in Amal Salihat. We will talk about the Maqtal of Imam Hussein. However, we have to note a couple of things. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ مِنْ شَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَجُوعٍ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَأَنفُسِ وَثَمَرَاتٍ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And we shall certainly try you with something of fear and hunger and lack of numbers and wealth and men and fruits, and give good news to the patient. The others are tried with all of these things, but there's one thing that Allah does not mention here, and this is something which was specially reserved for the Ahlul Bayt. Besides the threat and the fear and the lack of numbers, they were tried with thirst. Imam Hussein on that day was thirsty. He and his companions had been out all day in the sun, in hardship, fighting, growing tired and more tired. Imam Hussein finally was alone and abandoned. He had fallen from his horse. They were about to kill him. One last member of his family rushed out, which was a young boy. And right when they wanted to strike the Imam, he stuck out his arm and said, "Get away from my uncle." And they chopped off his arm and they murdered him as well. Then they beset upon the Imam, beating him, stabbing him, and they beheaded the Imam. After killing the Imam, they began to loot his belongings. They stole his armor. This was done by Omar ibn Saad. A man named Bahar bin Ka'b stole his pants. A man named Isaac ibn Hayat stole his shirt. Bashir took his turban. No, Ahbash took his turban. Malik bin Bashir took the fur from him. Habib took his sword. Aswad took his shoes. And Bajjal tried to take his ring, but when he tried to take the ring, it wouldn't come off of his hand. So he chopped off the fingers of Imam Hussein so that he could steal his ring. Then they desired, one of them tried to rip off the last piece of clothing, which was his izar, and the Imam's hands grabbed it and held it fast that he could not take this from him. And the man chopped off the hands of Imam Hussein. Then they gathered the bodies, all of them, to trample the bodies of the shuhada. But the different tribes began to say, you cannot trample the body of this person. This person is from our tribe. And they pulled him away from the ranks of the people who were to be trampled. Then another person came and said, no, this person is from our tribe. We demand that you cannot disgrace the body of our tribesmen. And they pulled him away from the people to be transferred. And this repeated and repeated 72 times until only the person who was the son of Fatima and Ali was the only one left. And they trampled that body with the horses. Imam Husayn's hands had been cut off. Finally, they trampled him and his body was completely crushed. After they had crushed his body, they began to then go one by one to the different shuhada and chop their heads off and put them on spears. Then they turned to the tents of the Ahlul Bayt. They said the worst thing, which was Ahriqul Buyut al-Zalimin, burn the houses of the oppressors. They began attacking the tents and setting them on fire, robbing the belongings of the Imam. If any of the women fought back, they were beaten with whips or punched. They stole jewelry which belonged to Fatima Zahra. They ripped the rings from their fingers. They pulled the earrings from their ears. They pulled the necklaces and jewelry from their feet. And they gave these as gifts to their own wives and their daughters. The women began to flee to escape this humiliation, and they chased them into the mountains and dragged them back. They entered into the tent of Zainab, and she was there with Imam Sajjad. They wished to kill Imam Sajjad. Shimr drew his sword and raised it over the head of Imam Sajjad. Zainab covered him and said, you've killed so many of us, you want to kill this one too? He said, oh, I'll leave him. Look how weak he is. He probably won't survive. Then they dragged the Prophet's granddaughters and the wives of the martyrs, and they tied their hands, and some of them they put on rough camels like sacks. Others they tied up in ropes and sat them together. Sakina ran back to Imam Husayn. She broke away from all of the oppression. She ran to Imam Husayn and began hugging him. They said, how do you know this is your father? He has no head, he has no hands. He said, I can hear him calling to me. They began to try to pull her to get her back, but she held so tightly she wouldn't release the body of the Imam. They began to beat Sakina and beat Sakina. She continued to hold on to the Imam, but she kept crying and crying, and finally they pulled her away. She said, no, I want to go to my father. They were crying, asking for help. They were saying, where is Abbas? Where is Ali Akbar? Who can help us? Who can save us? And nobody answered. Zainab made some very important statements. She said, Ilahi taqabbal minna hadha al-qurban. Oh Allah, accept this sacrifice from us. Then she said, Ya Muhammadah, sallallahu alayka malaikatus sama. The angels are praising you. هذا حيث حسين بالأرى. This is Husayn left out in the open and stripped. Murammalun bin dima. He's covered in blood. Muqatta'ul a'da. His limbs have been chopped. وَبَنَاتُكَ السَّبَايَا. Oh Muhammad, your children are, your daughters have been captured. وَذُرِّيَّتُكَ مُقَتَّلَةٌ, and your children have been slaughtered. تُصْفَى عَلَيْهَا السَّمَاء, they're covered in dust. فَأَبْقَتْ كُلَّ عَدُوٍ وَالصِّدِيقِ, and everyone is crying for them, the enemies and the friends. She said, may I be sacrificed for you? He is the son of Muhammad al-Mustafa wa Khadijatul Kubra wa Ali al-Murtada wa Fatima al-Zahra Sayyidat al-Nisa, the one who the son was brought back for his prayers. Ya Husna, Ya Qurba, oh my grief and the disaster. Al-yawma mata jaddi Rasulullah. Today, the grandfather of my grandfather, the Prophet, has died. Ya sahib Muhammad, O companions of the Prophet, haula'i durriyatum Mustafa. Sakona Sakan Suka Sabaya, they're marched as prisoners. And the soldiers of Omar ibn Saad began to cry. But they marched the women of the Prophet anyway. And they marched them in such a way that the heads of the shuhada, their fathers and their brothers and their sons were in front of them. They said, please put the heads behind us. And they said, no, you march behind the heads. So they began to see this and they began to cry. Finally, the Bani Asad came a few days later and they saw the horrible scene, bodies everywhere, left and right. They had not been buried, they were out in the sun. And there was a lion who was guarding the bodies and keeping the other animals away from them. And the lion itself was crying. They began to look to try to figure out who was who, and you couldn't tell because they had no heads, but they could tell which one was Husayn. This was because his body had been brutalized more than any of the other bodies. His chest was completely crushed. He had more than 60 wounds of spears and swords and arrows. They gathered the body and they buried them. The sky had turned black. People began to find blood underneath the different rocks and stones. They marched the women of the Prophet from town to town to town until they reached to Syria. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون ولعنة الله على قوم الظالمين. Ya Hussein,